The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Advocacy in Action. We're going to get started in just a minute, but want to give a few more seconds for folks to log in and get settled in. So we're just going to stay quiet here for a second, and then we'll get started in a moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Advocacy in Action. We're very glad to have you here. We have a pretty full agenda today, so we're going to go ahead and get started and let folks continue to log in as they're able. My name is Anna Mullen, and I'm the Communications Associate for the National Farm to School Network, and I'm going to be managing the back end of GoToWebinar today, and have a few housekeeping items for you all before we hop into the content and I pass it off for today's presentation. Today's webinar is 1 hour long and will conclude at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The webinar is being recorded and it will be emailed to all registrants tomorrow. It will also be available in our online resource library for viewing there. You as an attendee are on mute and on listen-only mode, but we really encourage you to engage with us and send us your questions. So in your control panel, you should see a question box at the bottom, and you can send us your questions at any time throughout the presentation. We will have a few moments for question and answer, and so you are able to send your questions at any point, and we will get to them, and as many as we can, during those Q&A times. We'll be referencing a few resources during this presentation, including one that is already in your control panel, the Farm to School Act of 2017 fact sheet. Anything that we reference in today's webinar will also send out via that email tomorrow with the recording. Lastly, I want to mention that today's webinar is one of many we hope to do on farm to school policy issues. So at the end of this webinar, when you log out, you'll see a very brief 3-question survey that asks for your feedback on what policy topics you'd like to see covered in upcoming webinars. So we'd really encourage you to just spend a moment or two providing us your feedback and help us build and create great webinars in the future that are of interest to you. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Anupama Joshi, NFSN's co-founder and executive director, to start today's webinar.
Thank you, Anna. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks, Anna, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am just amazed to see the interest in policy advocacy and the attendance at this webinar today. I'm going to kick off the webinar today by providing a brief overview of the National Farm to School Network to give you a little more context of our policy work, which is the focus of today's webinar. And my colleague, Maximilian Merrill, NFSN's policy director, will lead the content for today's webinar with our guest speakers. Next. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please?
I pushed the next slide. It's not, it should be there.
All right, we'll just keep going. So to get us started, we wanted to give you a quick overview of what Farm to School is. And Farm to School enriches the connection that communities have with fresh, healthy food and local food producers by changing food purchasing and education practices at schools and early care and education sites. Farm to School empowers children and their families to make informed food choices while supporting local agriculture and also strengthening the local economy and contributing to vibrant communities. With Farm to School, there is no one defined program, but an implementation of Farm to School varies by community. But we always say that Farm to School includes at least one of these core elements. The first one being procurement. Local foods are purchased, promoted, and served in the cafeteria or as a snack or taste test. Education. Students participate in education activities related to agriculture, food, health, and nutrition. And thirdly, school gardens. Students engage in hands-on learning through gardening. Next. And we find that these elements work together cohesively because they give students many opportunities to engage with fresh local food and build healthy habits. Farm to School sits uniquely at the intersection of various sectors, and these cross-sectoral benefits are why Farm to School is what it is and is successful as it is today, because it touches public health, education, economic development, and the environment. And we call it the triple win of Farm to School. It's a win for kids, it's a win for farmers, and it's a win for communities. Kids who participate in Farm to School are eating more servings of local products, including fruits and vegetables. By shortening the supply chains, we're seeing that farmers are keeping a bigger share of the dollars. And when communities are buying from local farmers and investing in their local community, kids are taking the learning from their schools into the communities. Communities are benefiting as well. Next slide, please. We're seeing tremendous growth in Farm to School, and Farm to School started in the late 1990s in California and Florida and has grown exponentially in the last decade and is operational now in all 50 states, DC, and the US territories. It's a movement that's reaching more students, engaging more farmers and producers, and positively impacting more communities every year. According to the latest USDA census, which reflects data from the school year 2013-2014, nearly 42% of US schools participate in Farm to School, engaging more than 23.6 million children, investing $800 million per year in school food purchases. Next slide, please. Actually, if you could go back one slide. Thanks. So who are we? The National Farm to School Network is the leading voice for the US Farm to School movement. We bring together more than 15,000 members in communities across the country. With our nearly 200 core and supporting partner organizations in all 50 states in DC and in the US territories, we work with state agencies, nonprofits, universities, and other entities who serve as affiliates of the National Farm to School Network and carry out the different functions that the National Farm to School Network performs. We have an advisory board of national experts, and we also have national staff. Next. The National Farm to School Network is the backbone organization for the Farm to School movement, and it's our mission to increase access to local food and nutrition education, to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. We do this by being the hub for information, advocacy, and networking for communities working to advance Farm to School. We define our role as an information creator, that we develop toolkits, trainings, and fact sheets that are needed by our stakeholders to implement Farm to School, but also as the information interpreter. So for example, compiling a literature review of Farm to School into an easy-to-use two-pager outlining the benefits of Farm to School, or doing an analysis of a policy memo from USDA related to local food procurement for schools, or a scan and an analysis of state-level Farm to School policies that are highlighting best practices trends and providing guidance to our state-level partners across the country. And you'll hear more about this resource specifically on the webinar today. With regards to policy advocacy, we have successfully engaged in federal policy. So for example, through the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, the establishment of the USDA Farm to School Grant Program, we were able to successfully advocate for that. At the state level, we work on policy advocacy through our network of core and supporting partners. In 2017, we are continuing to engage the new administration and look forward to furthering our federal policy priorities, which you'll also hear more of today. I'm encouraged to note that the leadership at the Department of Agriculture, for example, Secretary Sonny Perdue, at this year's School Nutrition Association publicly called out farm to school and encouraged schools to use more local products. Next slide, please. As a network, we bring together people to learn from each other, and this webinar is one example of this function. Another example is the National Farm to Cafeteria Conference, which we host every other year. It brings more than 1,000 people from the United States and some from outside the US into one location, providing the dedicated time for peer-to-peer learning, networking, and inspiration. Our next conference is coming up in April 2018, so please save the date, April 26, 27 in 2018, and we'd love to see you there in Cincinnati, Ohio. Next slide, please. And I would be remiss to wrap up my remarks if I did not mention that October, which is National Farm to School Month, is coming up. The National Farm to School Network advocated for the creation of National Farm to School Month in 2010, and it was designated by Congress. Now we organize the annual celebration every October in partnership with many other organizations to help raise a conversation and educate more people about the benefits that farm to school brings to kids, farmers, producers, and communities in every corner of the country. Our 2017 campaign aims to inspire, inform, and encourage everyone to take action for farm to school in their community and nationally. And there are lots of different ways that you can get involved in National Farm to School Month this October. Some of these are listed below. We have free resources available for you. We have a calendar of events. You can take action pledge. You can also become an outreach partner organization and help us spread the word about farm to school to your members. And there are links in here on the slide as well that will help you take action on all of those pieces. With that overview, I'm going to pass the baton over to Maximilian to lead us through the rest of the content.
Thank you, Anu. As Anu pointed out, one of our core functions of the network is to work on policy. And as the policy director for the network, I focus on federal policy and also state policy priorities for the network. So today we'll talk about sort of an overview on what federal policies we're working on right now, that being, of course, the Farm to School Act of 2017 and a few Farm Board policies, and we'll have a little question and answering after that. And then we'll look at sort of the broad range of state farm to school policies. Also sort of give an overview of our legislative survey that we will be coming out with this fall. Many of you folks have seen our past legislative survey from 2002 to 2014, and now we will have an updated survey, which we would like to highlight a few things about. And also we will just give a few examples for a few different states, just showing sort of a snippet on what's going out there. Today we have, thankfully, we have some great guest speakers with us today. Wes King, he is a policy specialist with NSAC, and as you folks know, we are a member of NSAC, and we work very tightly with NSAC on a number of key issues, including the Farm to School Act of the present and of the past. And we also have Megan Kemple from the Oregon Farm to School Network. She is the executive director of the Oregon Farm to School and School Garden Network, and she will be talking about the legislative history and the successes of Oregon. So touching on the federal policies and our priorities, as many of you know, last couple weeks ago, September 6th, Senator Leahy and Senator Cochran, also there was a companion bill in the House with Representative Fudge and Fortenberry. They dropped what we call the Farm to School Act of 2017. Now, in 2010, just to give a little background, Congress provided the mandatory funding of $5 million annually for the Farm to School Competitive Grant Program that Anu talked about briefly earlier. And through this program, we've seen multiple years of successes. We've seen schools purchasing over $700 million a year in local produce in just one school year. and that has been estimated to be over $1 billion in local economic activity. We have seen 23 million students eating healthier because they are engaged with the farm to school programs. And we have seen that these grant programs have helped over 12,000 schools improve nutritious meals. So we see what the benefits are, but what is needed. So looking at the applications and looking at what was coming in, these champions also recognize that not only does the program need tweaked a little bit, but the funding needed increased as well. Since 2013, USDA had received over 1,600 applications requesting over $120 million. However, it was only able to make 365 awards from about $25 million. So we, along with the champions, along with all of the folks, the core and supporting partners, felt like this was a very overprescribed program, and we needed to do something about it because there's much more in the farm to school programming we can do throughout the country. So in September 6th, Senator Lee, like I said, Senator Leahy and Senator Cochran and Representative Fudge and Fort Berry dropped the marker bill, and it does a few different things. It increased the mandatory funding from USDA to $5 to $15 million, and it helps improve the program participation for beginning, veteran, and socially disadvantaged farmers. But it also includes early child care and education sites to be eligible for these farm to school programming, and increases the native and tribal schools farm to fresh and traditional foods as a focus point as well. So we're very excited about this bill, and we hope that if you have an organization or you as just a person could go on our website and be a partner with us and sign up to support our bill and our programs, and we can continue this movement for this new bill. Currently, what the strategy is, as I said, it's just a marker bill. The bill is, just a marker bill, and we will be working very hard to get many co-sponsors on the House and the Senate side. In 2015, we had over 177 House sponsors and about 14 Senate sponsors as well. So we hope to get a lot more support than that. And then once we get all our co-sponsors, if we can find a legislative vehicle to attach this to and get it through the necessary committees, then we will work with our champions to do that. So moving on from that, some of our other federal priorities is the geographic preference in what we call the fruit and vegetable pilot program, but it's actually called the Pilot Program for Procurement of Unprocessed Fruits and Vegetables. And to go over the geographic preference language that we hope to change in the Farm Bill, Wes King is going to talk about that. Wes?
Yeah, thanks, Maximilian. So first I want to give a little bit of a background to the history of federal policy as it surrounds geographic preference or local foods procurement for schools. The 2002 Farm Bill is where kind of the story started. And in 2002 Farm Bill, the National School Lunch Act was amended to encourage institutions participating in child nutrition programs to purchase, quote, locally produced foods for school meal programs to the maximum extent practical and appropriate. Following the 2002 Farm Bill, we were able to build upon that language in the 2008 Farm Bill to further amend the National School Lunch Act to allow institutions, such as schools, receiving funds through the Child Nutrition Program to apply an optional geographic preference in procurement of unprocessed, locally grown, and locally raised agriculture products. However, since 2008, we have heard a lot about problems and confusion relative to the geographic preference language, and quite frankly, the fact that it didn't allow for simple, explicit specification of local or regional products in terms of procurement. This is something that we have heard many times over the years, that people would just love to be able to say local or regional in their procurement. So in order to provide some clarity, or also to provide that strengthen language to help schools more effectively procure local product from local producers, we are proposing to expand upon that 2008 language in the next Farm Bill to allow that specific specification of local for food procurement for school meal programs, provided it's still maintained as part of the competitive bidding process. Next slide. And so, as many of you may know, discussions around the next Farm Bill have heated up here in Washington, D.C. And a lot of people are introducing proposals and ideas around the Farm Bill, which the Farm to School Act of 2017 is potentially one of those. One of the things that the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition is working on is we will be, in the near future, introducing a larger local food marker bill with Representative Pingree of Maine and Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And in that, one of the provisions we have included and will be in that bill is some language to clarify the existing geographic preference option for school food procurement, to make very explicitly clear that local is an allowed product specification. It's quite simply that we've heard from members of the network over the years and from our own members as well, which includes the network, that this simple fix could go a long way to providing the flexibility that schools need to or would like to have to procure more product from local agriculture producers. They would still be able to use the existing geographic preference language. This would just add an additional option and really create that flexibility that schools and school districts need. That's all from me.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Wes. Yeah. Yes, if you would hold on for questions when we get to the end of the federal section.
Yep.
Moving on to another federal priority of ours is the Fruit and Vegetable Pilot Program, as we call it. As you know, the last Farm Bill allowed for this pilot program and selected 8 states to participate to increase their purchases of locally grown fruits and vegetables. They weren't necessarily deemed that they had to purchase local fruits and vegetables, but the pilot program allows the selected states to use some of their USDA food allocation to purchase unprocessed fruits and vegetables directly instead of going through the USDA Foods program. Pilot states are enjoying this flexibility with this program. Originally, when it first started, people were very concerned about the amount of vendors and amount of farmers out there. But as we see, as the program has continued, folks are really enjoying the program because of the quickness they can purchase fruits and vegetables in the area, especially when they're dealing with freshness issues and things that are very local to their areas and very specific to recipes they want to try. Some of the hurdles we've heard and talked with the different states that are doing this pilot project is that the GAP certification and the administrative burden. Working with GAP certification has been a problem with some farmers getting into the vendors list because of other programs like USA Foods and DoD Foods does not require GAP certification, but this program does. And also a lot of the small school districts could not use this pilot program to purchase these local foods because of the administrative burdens and the red tape that was involved and the lack of the backlog of payments. So we're working with USDA to figure and the different pilot programs to figure out how they what needs revamped and do we want to continue this in the new Farm Bill. USDA has already addressed many of the administrative issues that will now address the problems that a lot of the smaller school districts are dealing with. So, you know, at the very least, we need this program to continue as a pilot project to see if this current administrative fixes has helped make the program even more successful. So going on to questions, I think Anna will take your questions right now and talk to the group, and hopefully we can answer some of them.
Yeah, thanks. I'd encourage everyone to submit their questions via that question box in your control panel, and we have Wes and Maximilian who are available to answer questions for a few moments about federal farm-to-school policy. Maximilian, can you clarify who right now is able to participate in the fresh fruit and vegetable pilot program and where folks can find more information about it?
Absolutely. So the USDA has a very strong website on what vendors need to do and what school districts need to do online. Currently, they have not allowed any more folks to participate in the pilot program. Right now, they have basically shut down the application period and the availability of school districts and vendors. Vendors can still get on, but yeah, they sort of locked that down right now until they can figure out how to better be a service. So that's one thing we're going to definitely be looking at, is expanding the program in each one of the pilot states. But if you just simply look up pilot project for procurement of unprocessed fruits and vegetables, there is a very detailed and lengthy website on, the very intricate parts of the pilot project.
Great, thanks, Maximilian. We don't have any other questions at the moment, so I think maybe we can move on, and then if folks have more questions, we do have another question time set aside for the end of the webinar, and we can get to more.
Absolutely. Okay, well, moving on. As you know, we also try to help our core and supporting partners with state legislation, and we are also part of tracking what is going on out there and to analyze trends. And we just recently are in the process, of finishing our state legislative survey through to April of 2017. And as you can see here, there's some categories developed in some of the state legislation that's out there. We have state farm-to-school coordinators, permanent pilot programs, funding mechanism, local preference laws, online databases, task force, working groups, and broader policy initiatives like, wellness policies and things like that. What's kind of exciting from these types of things is when we looked at the data itself, we noticed from 2014 to 2017, some of these categories have just exponentially increased. For example, appropriations legislation has increased from 56 proposed bills to 132 proposed bills this year. Grant programs increased from 32 proposed bills to 107 this year. School gardens proposed bills throughout the states increased from 46 proposed bills to 95 in just a couple of years. And the list goes on and on. Task force increased over 50 by 50 bills. Food hubs increased from 14 in 2014 to over 40 bills supporting food hubs. So it's really kind of exciting to see when we did this survey, what's going on there in the farm to school movement, how it's driving. And this map sort of shows it, very spatially. You can see from, just from 2012 to 2017, there's a lot going out there in the states, and I have to give the hats off to our core and supporting partners. They're very passionate people that do very good work, and we are just basically tracking what's going on there and helping people facilitate things in one state versus another. And this is I think it's just a testament on all that hard work that's done out there. In the last 2 years alone, we have seen over 200 bills proposed. And some of the sort of the stronger areas, or if you were to rank, what are the bills that sort of were proposed the most in the last 2 years? Food education was number one. Number two was funding for these type of farm to school programs. And number three was promotional events for these types of farm to school programs and farmer summits going together like that. And, price preference legislation was on there as well. And also pilot projects was the fifth most popular bill in the last 2 years. So we're seeing a lot of good energy out there, a lot of good people working on the ground. And, this is a testament to all that good work. You can see what's going on here. And if you see the arrow on the blue line, the light blue line, we don't know what bills will be enacted in 2017 because we're still in this legislative calendar. So stay tuned for when that ends. Also, one thing we have in the legislative survey is sort of a ranking program. You can see the different colors ranking each one of the states, and from each one of those top legislative trends that we have, we sort of have a hierarchy on where each state's at the time for farm to school legislation, and this is one of the ways we track it and show it spatially. And as you can see, there's many different areas and many different states that do a little less and a little more. But we can see that with the amount of proposed bills out there, as in the slide before, states are getting greener and greener all the time. So to give an example about some of our states and what they are doing out there, Megan is online to talk about Oregon's legislative history and success. Megan?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Super. You can see here from the slide that we've had, that our policy has developed over the years and expanded. So we began with creation of a position within the Department of Agriculture, and then a year later, the creation of a position within the Department of Education, making Oregon the first state with a farm-to-school coordinator position in both departments of Ag and Ed. A few years later, the legislature, I should say that the Oregon Farm to School and School Garden Network was the primary advocate for these policies, engaging our network of stakeholders, which has grown from 65 stakeholders at the very beginning in 2007 to over 900 stakeholders now. So in 2011, we as a network lobbied and advocated and were able to secure $200,000 for a pilot program to reimburse schools for their purchases of Oregon grown and processed products, and funding for farm and garden-based education. 2 years later, the program was no longer a pilot and was a permanent, well, what was considered at the time a permanent program of $1.2 million for the same grants, just more funding for both. And then in 2015, the program was funded at what could be considered full funding. Full funding for us would actually be more like $15 million, but the $4.5 million that we secured in 2015 was a huge victory and considered success, and we are very pleased. In comparison, the USDA Farm to School grants are $5 million per year, and Oregon itself has a $4.5 million grant program just for our own state. The USDA grants of $5 million are for the country. They are for 1 year. Ours are for 2, so more like $2.5 million per year. Then again, this last session, we were able to secure $4.5 million from the legislature at a time when the state budget had huge cuts in the billions, and we were able to secure continued funding for the program. So I'll just share with you how that happened and some lessons learned. I was the lead on policy advocacy as the director of the Oregon Farm to School and School Garden Network, and had strong support from a policy work group that met monthly. We had a pro bono lobbyist who was really helpful as a key advisor primarily. So I did most of the constituent and legislative engagement with legislators, and she was really valuable support to me in helping me understand the hearing committee structures, the ins and outs of how the legislative process that I wasn't as familiar with, although I had a good amount of experience. She was a professional, so she was a great advisor in that area. I should say that this was a probably 3 months, very intensive amount of work, and the network didn't have funding for the last month and a half of the effort, and so the work was actually unpaid. So just keep in mind that this was a labor of love, and happened because basically I felt like it was critical that we secure funding for the program when it was facing significant cuts. Actually, it was proposed to be eliminated from the state budget. So the history there is that we thought we would be okay with reallocation of funding that we'd received previously, and mid-session we learned that in the version of the legislative budget that was expected to advance, the funding for the program was eliminated. At that time, we just really jumped into high gear to engage our stakeholders from all over Oregon in advocating, and I'll describe more how we did that in a little bit. Near the end of the session, there was concern about an exclusion that we'd written into the program, the grant program, which provides reimbursement for purchases of Oregon grown and processed foods, and we had excluded from the allowable products bread and milk, because in Oregon both bread and milk are purchased by school districts on a regular basis and always almost entirely from Oregon sources. So to reimburse schools for their purchases of Oregon milk and bread would not have increased their purchases of Oregon products. It would have simply reimbursed them for purchases they were already making, and last grant period, almost a third of the funding was spent on bread that they would have been buying anyway. So we proposed an exclusion. There was concern by the dairy industry and some legislators that represented both wheat and dairy districts, and we recognized that we needed to not to call out specific commodities in the bill language. So that was a lesson learned, not to call out specific commodities in a bill, but work on what the intent of the program is and draft the language that way. So we revised the policy so that specifying that purchases with grant funds shall not supplant purchases made prior to a district's participation in the grant program. So basically saying schools can't buy things that they were buying prior to participating. They need to buy new products from new sources, from Oregon sources. We had a legislative champion. He just wouldn't say no and he wouldn't accept the elimination of funding in the budget. He was just a strong advocate. And then we also had a leader on the co-chair of Ways and Means, which is our budget committee, was very familiar with Farm to School and an advocate. Although she eliminated funding for the program in the budget, she understood its value and was responsive in the end. And we also had support from the Speaker of the House. And in the very end, in the last days of the session, the bill passed unanimously in both the House and in the Senate with full funding, which was the $4.5 million, the same amount as last session. So every single legislator in both chambers voted aye in support of the bill. And I'll just give a little overview of what we did to engage our stakeholders. So we have again this broad network of 900 stakeholders, including garden educators, nutrition services staff, farmers, nonprofit partners, schools, educators, and they engaged. And the beautiful thing about our network is that we have these 900 stakeholders, and they had real stories to share with their legislators. So they weren't just clicking a button, sending a comment that was generic. They were calling and sharing their stories. They were writing message emails that were personalized. They were showing up at hearings and sharing their experiences and why these programs are valuable to them. And they were sending formal letters of support documenting the impact of these programs. So we had at least 4 site visits in district with legislators to school district farms and gardens. We had 2 lobby days coordinated by partner organizations where the bill was included as a priority, so it was mentioned at legislative visits. We had at least 4 other constituent meetings in person with legislators in Salem. I had a lot of others, but these were constituent meetings that I'm referring to. 5 constituents attended town halls and listening sessions in their communities. I'm going to go down a long list here, so bear with me. We'll be done soon. Approximately 290 personalized phone calls and emails, primarily to the Ways and Means, which is our budget committee. 300, and I'll just share this report with Maximilian and he can include it as a handout. Maybe I'll try to do that before this call so it can be linked as a handout in the webinar. 364 generic email messages that were in response to kind of an action alert, and 41 customized messages from 106 constituents generated from our online form, and that went to 73 legislators and the governor. 7 formal letters of support sent to all legislators by partner organizations with statewide reach. 37 formal letters of support from our grantees and producers and local community organizations. 2 public hearings with testimony from 14 people in person and 41 organizations or individuals in writing. 8 news stories about the programs within their districts, and 3 letters to the editor. So that's what we did, how we did it, and it was a really positive experience for me to be able to engage this network in advocating and be successful.
Wow, thank you, Megan. That's very inspiring, and it's just one of the many examples that our core and supporting partners can show, and that's sort of the exact way these legislative bills throughout the country have increased so exponentially in the last 5 to 10 years. And thank you for sharing that example. You know, the folks will engage in questions after this section, Megan, so please hang on. You know, Oregon is not the only example out there, you know, that are doing some great things out there, but I just wanted to touch on 2 things, just randomly picked out of the hat. You know, what are other states doing? What are some of the bills out there? Nevada just passed a school garden creation and maintenance fund. It was signed into law June 8th, and this bill appropriated grant funding to Title I schools in order to establish and maintain a school garden program. What is great about this bill is in order to for a school to get this funding, they have to design a curriculum and also design a way that the food is going to get into the school. So without, you know, discussing and really sitting down and thinking about how the students are going to learn about farm to school and school gardening, and then also how are they going to safely bring that food into the school lunch program, they can't receive any funding for their creation of their school garden. So I think it's very important that those components are in the bill and in the grant program. Another thing is that Wes touched on just a little bit is, you know, when local schools reach out to, you know, local foods, it's, you know, they're having different procurement issues. And one of the issues is the small purchase threshold. And in Alabama, they established the Farm to School Procurement Act, which basically increased the small purchase threshold from $15,000 to $150,000. So those school districts, when they were purchasing a bunch of cantaloupes for their, you know, into all their schools and stuff, they do not have to go out to bid, and they can actually sort of surpass, if you will, that geographic or that local preference problem that Wes was talking about. They can just go and purchase that food that they need on the spot and when they need it. So are there any questions out there, you know, for the state policy or the federal policy part of this webinar, as your thoughts sort of, you know, came together? Anna?
Yeah, so again, folks, you can submit your questions via that question box. And we have a few moments.
Okay, just as the questions are coming in, I just want to make folks aware that the fact sheet is already attached here to this webinar and will also be linked when we send out a survey, and also we will also send out a link to the House and Senate version of the bills, which are very similar. You know, actually they're identical. One of the things that I forgot to mention on the National Farm to School Policy Act, National Farm to School Act, is that NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, recently passed at their annual meeting in New Orleans a policy amendment to support farm to school programs throughout the country. They also passed an action item that the organization should work on increasing the funds for the USDA Farm to School Grant Program. As you know, NASDA represents all the state agricultural departments out there, and we're very excited that we have worked with NASDA to get this part of their platform, and we will be reaching out to them and working with them in the future to establish that this grant program does get increased funding.
Great.
Any questions out there, Anna?
A question for Megan, who listed off just a really incredible and inspiring list of actions that the Oregon Farm to School and School Garden Network took to connect with their legislators around, or at least this past spring, as their bill was up and the funding question was on the table. And wondering, you know, out of that long list that you read, are there specific strategies that seem to be especially impactful or ones that resonated most with the legislators? Or is a combination of all of them, I'm sure, is probably the answer. But any in particular that, Megan, you would call out as being especially impactful?
Well, in-person visits with legislators are always the most impactful. So those times when individuals were coming to Salem, which is our capital, to our state capital for lobby days, were really valuable. Those are the experience times when legislators can really hear the stories and see people as people. And but they also need to be getting that kind of constant reminder, our legislators do, in their email box and their phone messages, letting them know that their constituents are concerned about this. So if they had only, you know, these 10 or so in-person meetings and then hadn't been hearing from their constituents over the course of the session, that we probably would not have been successful. And then the hearings are really important. If there's a hearing and nobody shows up, I mean, one time we had 12 hours notice, and the night before we were able, you know, we heard at 4 o'clock, and I asked people to go, and this was not like the main hearing. This was a secondary hearing to finalize the amendments. But I think we had 7 people in person, or I guess we had 4, but they were critical stakeholders. And then we had something like 14 written comments, you know, within a 24-hour period. So that was great. The public, you know, you have to get people to those public hearings. And then the letters of support, I think, were kind of icing on the cake, but really helped a lot. So again, we had 37 letters of support, actually 37 plus 7, so 44-ish letters of support from statewide and local organizations. And I'm sure those statewide ones really helped. And then the individual ones just kind of formalized, instead of getting an email that just said, hey, take action, you know, to support this bill, the legislators, instead of getting an email saying, please support our bill, they got a formal letter on letterhead from a school district with a signature from the nutrition services director, for example, and that holds more weight than those other emails. So I think the answer is all of them, but any in-person or personalized contact was the most valuable. I don't know how much difference the 350 generic email messages made, but that was important too, for having something easy for people to do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Megan. Those are some really great, further details and helpful feedback on that for folks. A question.
Yeah, Anna, I would go ahead.
Nope.
No, go ahead with the question.
It's a different question.
Okay, Anna, I would like to just add to that, Megan. I think Megan would agree that every aspect of advocacy is looked at differently and has heavier weight. But, you know, legislators or congressmen or senators, they always look at certain parts of advocacy in a different way, and they calculate the multiplying factor. So calls, they consider that's 10 people, and letters they consider that's 100 people, and so on. And official letters are considered more. So every aspect counts, and the way Megan did it in her state is absolutely superb.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. A question for Maximilian about the Farm to School Act. I'm wondering what folks can expect next in terms of timeline, when there will be more co-sponsors, any timeline or guidance you can give on what folks can expect next for that marker bill.
Very good question. What we're working on now is co-sponsors. As you know, most of our Senate champions are dealing with healthcare, so their bandwidth is sort of shut down right now. But we will be working with them to work on the Dear Colleague letters and email all their different legislative directors in the different offices. And I am personally going around to each of the offices that have expressed a interest in the past, and we think they have an interest in the future. So we'll be working with all our core and supporting partners and anyone who's interested in Farm to School to, cast this, local light on what's going on in each of the states. And then we move into the House, and we're looking at, of course, the different committees that might be able to take up this bill based on their jurisdiction, but also the states that are that haven't been a supporter of Farm to School in the past, but they have received a lot of grants. So it's a very systematic approach, and the more co-sponsors we get, the merrier. And we have a lot of people reaching out, and once our champions start spearheading this, we believe it's going to sort of snowball in the next couple of weeks. And then as that all those co-sponsors sign up, we'll be looking for legislative vehicles. But until we get that long list of co-sponsors, we can't really seriously look at a legislative vehicle.
I think maybe as a follow-up to that point, Maximilian, folks are wondering if there's anything specific that they can do, or any action items that they should be engaging in to help with support around the Farm to School Act.
Yes, absolutely. If you are a person, you can go to our website, or an individual, I should say. Of course, you're a person. And sign up to be a supporter of the Act. But also, if you have an organization, sign up to be a supporter of the Act. And like Megan said, those letters or from your organization or to your congressman or to your senator, they definitely help. They file away and they make a difference. So any type of call to action that or buy-in you're willing to do is more than going to be beneficial to us. So I would say the first two things would be, of course, to sign up on our website for individual and organizational sponsorship, but also do those individual site visits, meet with your local, even your state legislators, because they're tuned into what's going on in the federal realm as well. And also, make those phone calls to the folks in DC and their local offices at home as well. And when they come home, to their respective districts or the respective states, feel free to visit with them as well and talk with them about the importance of the Farm to School grant program. And, you folks will be getting our fact sheet. Our talking points are there. They're very simple, and it's a very bipartisan issue, and it's a triple win, like Anu said. And people, I haven't had any doors slammed in my face starting this position only 4 months ago. It's been a wonderful for someone who likes to work on policy to be able to walk into any office and folks listen about what's going on in their state and about the wonderful nutrition that's being provided by local farms.
Great, yeah, and just to follow up on a few things you said, just in case folks haven't seen, we linked to both the individual and organizational sign-on letters for the Farm to School Act in your control panel. So that's a really easy action you can take right now, is just to click those links and fill in your information and add your name as a supporter of the Farm to School Act of 2017. And a second plug, following up on things you just said, Maximilian, with October being National Farm to School Month, this is a really opportune time to take some of those actions that Maximilian just mentioned, connecting with legislators, inviting them to your Farm to School site to see Farm to School in action, to write letters together, to make phone calls specific to Farm to School. obviously any of the 12 months of the year are great times to do those things, great times to show off your programs and make sure that your legislators know the benefits of farm to school in your community. But Farm to School Month is an especially great time to do it because you can add that little plug that it's also a nationally delegated time of celebration. Do we have more time for questions, Maximilian, or are we near the end?
We have 5 minutes for questions. Here's my information. If anybody would just, there are things you can, think of later, or other advocacy issues you want to talk about, feel free to send me an email or reach out via phone. Sometimes I'm hard to get in touch with via email because I'm on and off the Hill a lot, but feel free to reach out if you have any interest or want to know about ways to also get involved that Anna talked about. But we do have 5 minutes we do have 4 minutes for questions, and we could probably return people's time, but want to make sure we answer all the questions we can.
Yeah, here's a question that I think is interesting, one for Megan again. Wondering if you've found any legislators, Megan, that were not as supportive of farm to school, and if yes, how did you address that?
Everyone was supportive of farm to school. So they understand the economic development benefits. They understand the benefits to kids. They understand the value of connecting schools with Oregon agriculture. We had this one legislator who is known for not being very kind in her interactions with even constituents and colleagues, and she was one who had concerns about the elimination of reimbursement for bread and milk. So she, although she said several times that she wanted to vote for the policy, she wasn't helping to facilitate that process. But otherwise, again, everyone voted yes. They didn't have to. They did. Even she voted yes in the end. And but there was no concern about the program overall. It was just some of these very, very specific details that were of concern actually to 3 legislators who had dairy and wheat, a lot of dairy and wheat producers in their districts, and they didn't understand that the language that we had would not actually impact their industries because the schools were already buying those products. They just didn't want those industries called out in the bill. So we addressed that, and they were all able to work with us in the end.
And then maybe just one more quick question for any of the speakers on the line. Or what arguments do you think are most persuasive for legislators when talking about farm to school? Are there specific talking points that you think resonate with them most and that folks should always have on the tip of their tongues when they're talking to lawmakers?
I'll take that. And I guess it's different for federal and state perspective. When I'm working on the federal perspective, right now I'm focused on the economic aspects of farm to school. When you're dealing with rural economies and the loss of manufacturing, agencies like the Federal Reserve and the USDA is focusing on what can we do for rural economies. And this is just a no-brainer. It's having school districts purchase food from local farmers, increasing, the dollar per share that local farms can get instead of going into the commodity system, and increasing the nutrition for kids is sort of a no-brainer for even what we would consider the right side of the aisle. When you're working with some of the left side of the aisle, you focus on some of the obesity issues and the nutrition issues and the equity issues. But really, if you combined all these points in one, it really is sort of a nonpartisan issue. Megan, you might have some aspects to say about some of the state points.
I do. In Oregon, we found over and over that economic development was the key. that our legislators here in Oregon are responsible for both balancing our budget, and they're responsible for making sure that Oregon is thriving. And they see that as tied to a thriving economy. So they want to support the program primarily because they understand that they will be keeping those dollars in Oregon and supporting Oregon's economic development. So we definitely focus on that first, and the health and environmental benefits secondarily, although we always mention them all when we have the opportunity.
Well, I guess that's our time now, Anna. So I just want to thank everybody for attending the conference. And do you have any last-minute housekeeping things to state, Anna?
No, just a reminder to folks that we'll send out the recording of this webinar to you tomorrow, as well as links to some of the things and resources we talked about. And would encourage you all to stay engaged with Farm to School and to stay engaged with this advocacy work by visiting us at farmtoschool.org, and make sure you're signed up for our newsletter so that you can get action alerts when there are pieces that are especially important to plug into to advocate for Farm to School. I think that's all. Thank you all so much for being on the webinar today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on future NFSN webinars. Take care.
Thank you.